Hey everybody, welcome to DadsDen of Pop Culture. Have you ever seen Timeslip? Man, this is something I'd never heard of until a few years ago. Happened to pop up in like my, various searching around on YouTube. Gave it a try and was pretty darn pleased with what I discovered. It is a British children's science fiction show that aired on ITV 1970 through 1971. And now you might be saying, well, it's a children's show. Why do I care about that? Well, look, children's shows do not have to be stupid. In fact, I would argue children's shows that are stupid are really aimed more towards the stupid than they are to children. There are some really brilliant children's shows, programs, animated and live action, and many in terms of science fiction that are actually, very clever and very thought-provoking. Sometimes you have to get beneath the sort of sheen of kid-friendliness. A good example to me is The Land of the Lost, which is a really, really funky concept and really interesting. Maybe the show doesn't delve into it as deeply as it could, but there's a lot of thought that went behind that show. And Timeslip is very similar in that regard. So let's take a look at some of the images from the first episode. Now, the show was done as serials, sort of like Doctor Who from the same period. So we can look at, bits and pieces from the first episode without it, ruining the story for you. So don't worry about that. And then we'll chat about the other serials a little bit as well. So let's get started. So we begin in the first episode with Peter Farrelly explaining concepts to us like deja vu and time travel. I mean, he's sort of explaining that stuff to us. And it kind of feels like, well, we need to throw this in so it will look like educational programming. But what we really want to do is tell a really cool sci-fi story. And then we get the title, Timeslip. It's worth noting that this series was shot in color, spelled with a U, of course, because it's a British show. But only one color episode survives. The other ones, like the tapes were lost or were just erased and used over again. That happened a lot in the UK. It's why we're missing a few episodes and a few serials of older Doctor Who. Honestly, same kind of thing happened at Warner Brothers for their cartoons. They would take the painted cells and they would wash them off so they could use them again. That's why a lot of the original cells from Warner Brothers are more valuable than ones from Disney, because Disney saved everything. And not a lot always survived from Warner Brothers. But at any rate, so you're going to be looking at most of these in black and white, but there is one color episode. We'll look at an image from that a little later. We have the title of our first serial, The Wrong End of Time. Now, I did mention the entire series consists of 4 serials, each with, I think, about 6 episodes. And they ran, like I said, from 70 to 71. So we will talk about those other serials later. And one cool thing is they do sort of all relate to one another. They're not just completely individualized. Written by Bruce Stewart, did a lot of writing for TV back in the day. So we kind of start out with this image of a abandoned military installation, Ministry of Defense, keep out. And approaching this is this girl. Now you get the feeling that she may not be the brightest bulb in the bunch. Seems a little confused, but there's also this weird fluctuating hum coming from somewhere, from like the front gate fence area. And that's kind of what has her attention here. And so this guy who's clearly been drinking is napping nearby. He kind of wakes up in time to see this girl, Sarah, disappear, seemingly into midair. And before she does that, we see that she looked like she was pressing against a sort of invisible force. And since she doesn't appear to be a mime, there's probably some kind of weird science fiction-y element to this. And in essence, what she has discovered is a portal. So the drunk investigates. He finds nothing. The hum is gone, so he doesn't find that sort of invisible force. He doesn't find the portal. Now, the next scene is at a pub where the drunk is telling people about what he saw and what he knows about this missing girl, Sarah. And you see in the background a man watching them. He's going to be very important, not only to this serial, but to the entire series. His name is Commander Charles Trainer. And he hears what they're talking about with this old military installation. Leaving the bar, he walks to the great room of what looks like an inn, where he meets Gene Skinner, who has just awakened from a nightmare. The Skinners are planning to go on a gypsy caravan trip while their daughter, Liz, is off from school, some kind of vacation, and a friend, Simon Randall, is coming with them. Now, the family was going to stay in this village, St. Oswald, but Jean didn't like it. There was some weird feeling she got. She didn't want to be there. Now, this is where her husband was stationed during World War II at that installation. It was a naval installation. And mention of this makes Trainer a little bit moody. So we next see Frank Skinner, the man of the family, preparing the gypsy wagon, while his daughter, Liz, who's played by Cheryl Burfield, looks on, and Simon, played by Spencer Banks, reads a book. Now, Burfield was 18 at the time, playing a 15-year-old. Banks was actually 15. So Liz doesn't like Simon. He's so boring. He's always just reading books. And this kind of relationship between the two of them, sometimes a little antagonistic, but with moments of friendliness, it's going to continue through most of the series. And what we learned, though, in her talking to her father, is that Simon recently lost his mother, which is very careless of him. His father, Tom, is Frank Skinner's best or oldest friend. Frank tells his daughter to take Simon for a little tramp over the hills and, to stop him from brooding. And this leads directly to their adventures. Now, Liz mentions that she's glad they're leaving St. Oswald. There's something weird about the place. So it's something she's noticed, just like her mother. Dad and Simon don't need to notice it at all. We next see Commander Trainer. He is walking around that military base, and in particular, he inspects a hole at the bottom of a particular interior wall. And this will become meaningful later in the story. And at this point, Liz and Simon come running up to the military base. And Simon pauses when he sees the sign warning people to keep out. And at one point, Liz kind of hides behind a rise, then pops out to scare Simon as he notices a strange noise. And when Liz runs off again, she runs right into that invisible barrier. Simon wants to take off, but Liz is more adventurous, and they keep messing about with the barrier until they discover that portal. And both of them go through. Now, back at the inn, Trainer and Frank have a chat. When Trainer returns from his walk through the hills, he questions Frank about his plans, about his being at the old naval station during the war. He's a little inquisitive, but maybe he's just sort of making conversation. And in the course of the conversation, we learned that Frank lost his memory of the time at the naval station back in 1940, which is why he wanted to come back to St. Oswald. Frank has a part to play in this story, but much less so in the other stories in the series. But Trainer remains a major character throughout, with some very interesting twists and turns. And so at this point, we end part 1 of Timeslip. And then on to part 2. So that gives you an idea how they divide the series or each episode. So part 2 opens in darkness, and we pan down a fence until we see Simon on hands and knees whispering after where Liz is, and he hears her sobbing. Apparently she hurt her elbow falling through the hole. And note that it is now nighttime where it was clearly daytime, and the fence looks like it's in good repair there. And so Liz goes back through the portal and discovers that, in fact, on the other side, it is daytime, and she's back in her normal time. And she's kind of excited about this. She pops back in. Simon is still worried. And then they hear a noise. And they duck down. And a group of men appear speaking German. The Jerrys. And they appear to be naval officers. So the Germans depart the scene. And while Liz and Simon are discussing what to do, they're caught by a sentry. And this, of course, being an Englishman who's supposed to be there. Now, back at the inn, and this is obviously sometime later, Frank returns from looking for the kids and tells Jean, I can't find them. And while they speak, Jean suddenly holds her head and we hear a piercing noise. And it's going to turn out in the series that Jean has a sort of psychic connection with her daughter, Liz. And this rapport lets her maybe sense or see what she's seeing, but it's not like they can communicate telepathically. So it's not used as like a Deus Ex Machina. It does help with the story at certain times, but it's not overplayed at all, which I really appreciate. So at the pub at this time, Traynor discovers that the tramp that we saw earlier has found Simon's book by the naval station. So we have two more missing children with a clue pointing to the naval station once again. And the bartender wonders why Traynor is so interested in the disappearance of these children. Traynor's, I'm just a curious sort of guy. Back in 1940, Liz and Simon are led into the station, and while waiting to see the base commander, Simon sees this room, and he realizes that this is a radar room. And of course, a kid in the 1940s would probably not understand any of this. That's going to be important. When they're ushered into the commander's office, they are amazed to see Commander Traynor, much younger. And he's tired of the village children showing up at his secret naval research station. And now we understand a little better why he's asking all these questions in 1970. It's because he was there 30 years earlier and probably has some memory of these children mysteriously showing up. And we next see Jean in sort of a trance, speaking in German, and Frank trying to wake her up. Back in 1940, Traynor is bawling him out about, cutting a hole in the fence, and Simon claims, we didn't cut a hole in the fence. Must have been those other men, the ones speaking German. And naturally, this gets a laugh from Traynor, like, oh yeah, sure, okay, the Germans. And then we see, outside, the Germans disable the sentry. And the German captain stopped one of his men from killing him. This is kind of important. And in Traynor's office, he says these children are to be considered his prisoners until he can contact their parents. And this sets Liz to crying. And the guard tries to comfort her. And while he does, he learns that her last name, is Skinner. And he goes, oh, well, that's my name as well, Frank Skinner. And Liz realizes that this is her father from 30 years ago. And I will say, they did a pretty good job of picking somebody who does actually look a little bit like the older Frank Skinner. And so this particular episode ends focusing on that radar screen with the Germans poised to seize control and Liz having encountered her father. And it sets up the first storyline and somewhat the remainder of the series. Now, the first story is not heavily sci-fi. It has a little bit more to do with what's going on at the research station and the Germans being in control and them trying to figure out how to escape, with the portal sort of being the way that the story gets going. And obviously it's kind of also the way they're going to get out of it. Subsequent stories tackle the science fiction themes a little bit more. Now, the next storyline is The Time of the Icebox. And here, this is the serial where we do get one color episode. And here's a little look of what everybody looks like in 1970 in full color. And I'll tell you what, if you've watched, it's not the first episode of the serial. So you're a couple, 3 episodes in. And when you see this, you're like, wow, I had no idea those outfits they were wearing. But in this one, Liz and Simon emerge essentially into like Antarctica. and almost die from the cold. And they find themselves in this sort of self-enclosed research base with a guy in charge who's maybe not completely there. And so a little bit more science fiction-y because it is set in the future with a really interesting twist that you'll have to watch and find out. The third serial is the year of the burn-up. And here they emerge into what appears to be like a tropical jungle. And they go, oh, we're in Africa now. Okay, interesting. And they encounter this woman and, start trying to talk to her. And of course, she speaks back in a British accent because it turns out that this tropical jungle is Britain. In fact, it's probably, in the general vicinity, maybe of like London or so. And so again, much more science fiction-y, this one, with another couple interesting twists in it. And it does advance the overall storyline as well. The final serial is The Day of the Clone. And this has an element now that's going to really tie everything together. It begins more or less with the kids, at least with Liz, waking up in this research facility, kind of unaware of what's going on. So the overall theme you get from Timeslip is one of the dangers of science. And in 1970, the whole, the world of the future is going to be beautiful and wonderful and just excellent, that you kind of get from, say, the Walt Disney Company, from a lot of futurists, Tomorrowland, and all that kind of stuff, starting to grind down a bit. And as we get into the 70s, it's where we're going to get more into dystopian science fiction. Now, there's a dystopian element to these, but a lot of it has to do with the dangers of science. And living in 2025, there are definitely some themes that are going to resonate with a lot of people here, as well they really should. But while it is a show for kids, and remember, Doctor Who ostensibly was as well, at least initially, the classic Who. Maybe it became a little less so as it went, but it still stayed safe for kids. So since it's for children, you're not going to get a lot of cursing, and you're not going to get a lot of sex, and you're not going to get a lot of like really brutal violence or anything. But you do get some really interesting story ideas, some very clever things, and some really smart commentary on science and all that stuff. So Timeslip, great little series. Not a ton of episodes. Like I said, there's 4 serials, so it's maybe about 24 episodes, right around there. Each episode is, would fit into a 30-minute time slot. So they're 25, maybe 22 to 25 minutes long. So it doesn't take long to watch the entire series, but I really enjoyed it. I've watched the whole series now twice. And it's definitely one I would go back and watch again. It's pretty fun. If there's any complaint whatsoever, it's probably Liz can be a little bit of a crybaby once in a while, and is sometimes used as the foil to the somewhat more logical Simon. Although there is a good episode about that may not be the best characteristic in the world to have if it's taken too far. But, and so there is like, she's a little more emotional, he's a little more logical, and they both find out, the troubles in those things, and maybe to find a better balance. It's smart stuff. It would still be great for kids, but I think adults, especially adults who are sci-fi fans, could really enjoy Timeslip. So go take a look. I found it on YouTube. It's probably out there to be found elsewhere. But again, if if you're looking for it on DVD and you're in the US, you could run into a trouble with like regional stuff. I don't know that it's made it onto any other major streaming platforms. Frankly, it really should, because it's quite good. But let me know in the comments what you think. If you've seen Timeslip, maybe you grew up with it in the UK. I'd love to hear what you think about the show. If you have any questions, anything like that, throw it in the comments for me, and I will do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. If you enjoyed this little video peek at Timeslip, this little review, please give the video a like. Maybe think of subscribing to the channel, sharing with a friend. That would be very groovy. Helps our little channel to grow, where I try my best to put stuff out there that people might really enjoy, and maybe things that they haven't ever seen before, haven't heard of before. It's kind of my mission of my channel if I have one. But until next time, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. Have a little bit of fun out there. Watch Timeslip. And I will see you again, hopefully soon, in Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Bye-bye.